On Friday, March 22nd, the Norwood Police took citizens on a first-ever virtual ride-along through the use of social media. Residents were invited ahead of time to tune into our Twitter page starting at 4 p.m. as Officer Andrew Jurowicz tweeted live from the road. The goal of the ride-along was to provide citizens a feel for what policing in their community consists of, with the added benefit of a real-time experience. Followers were encouraged to send in any questions or comments they had as the night progressed. Photos accompanied tweets when possible. The event kicked off promptly at 4 p.m. as officers of the evening shift were briefed in the roll call room. Highlights of the evening included a tour of the equipment maintained in each of our fleet vehicles, multiple motor vehicle stops, as well as a description for each stop and a look at the training officers receive on new tactics that offenders are using to commit crimes. Officer Jurowicz also stopped in on some local businesses to include AJ's Market on Walpole Street and the newly renovated Norwood Theater. We considered a community outreach a vital piece of policing, and that building strength with our local businesses is one key to a safer community. The night continued with a brief look at some of the gear on officers' belts to include the taser, which MPD officers were outfitted with just last year. Halfway through the shift, comments from some of our followers on our Twitter page caught our attention. We made sure to retweet those comments and say thanks for the kind words. Continuing throughout the night, citizens were made aware of different actions our officers take in addition to calls for service, to include checking in on the local cemetery for vandals, enforcing parking restrictions, and checking the railroad tracks for trespassers. We finished the night off with a male party being placed under arrest by a member of our fugitive apprehension team for an outstanding warrant. As previously stated, the comments from some of our followers were very positive and motivating. A lot of people were thankful and happy to see their local police department staying up to date with the technology and taking such great steps to keep the public informed of what is happening in their town. We consider the night a success, and by the comments that were flying in via our subscribers, we imagine they considered it a success as well. It is our goal to continue to keep the community informed through the use of social media, to include our Twitter and Facebook pages. Updates are posted on a weekly, if not daily, basis. The feedback we receive from the community in response to our efforts is greatly appreciated and not overlooked. We also would like to stress that the police greatly rely on the community. If you see something out of place, don't hesitate to call.
My name is Sarah Lydon, and I've been with the Norwood Police Department for about 9 years now. I graduated in 2004 from the MBTA Police Academy, which is in Quincy, Mass. I went to the academy with Greg Shore and Tim McDonough. 3 of us went together, which was a good experience because I'm not from the town. I grew up in Dedham, so it was at least when I went to the academy, I knew people from the town. It gave me the opportunity to get to meet other people in the town as well, and assimilate into the town of Norwood. When I got to Norwood, I worked midnights for about the first 5 years, which I enjoyed. And while I was working midnights, they also had me. They started getting me to work with the Metro Computer Crime Unit in the crime lab on the 2nd floor with Dave Papageris. Dave was a detective with Norwood P.D. for 20 years or so, and when I came off, I did some training with him, and I was on light duty after I was in an accident, so I ended up spending all my light duty in the lab and having an opportunity to really learn from Dave on computer forensics. So in the lab in Metrolec, what we do is we're responsible for assisting communities, 42 communities in the Commonwealth, with cell phones, laptops, servers, GPS units, desktops, iPads, you name it, whatever's really out there. We have the opportunity to assist agencies with. And the crimes range anywhere from drugs to child pornography, murder. We've assisted with crimes with Boston and stuff like that. So I've been I've been the primary forensic specialist in Metro now for the past 5 years or so. I've also, for a few years, I did the field training for the department. So that really was interesting. It was something I was really interested in doing, and I was actually very honored when they asked me to be a field training officer. I felt like it was very important to bring new officers into the department, teach them the ropes, show them, how things are done, and give them the ins and outs of how things run around here, and try to be a good role model for incoming officers. So I did that for a few years. And also what I do is I'm also part of the Honor Guard. The Honor Guard really means something to me because I do believe that the town of Norwood should be represented in parades, and whether it's a local parade or if it's something that we go out and do. I believe that's important. But more importantly, I believe it's important that when an officer passes away, whether it's tragically or from natural causes, that his service to a town or a state should be recognized. I mean, it's a commitment, it's a sacrifice, it's a wonderful job, but that officer in some cases has given his life for his community and for doing what's right. And I truly believe that the Honor Guard is just important for the town of Norwood to be represented at funerals and services. I've done that for the past 5 years or so. I find it very rewarding. I got into law enforcement because my grandfather was a lieutenant for the town of Norwood, and back in the 50s, and he retired back in, I believe it was 81 or so. He was the executive officer here when he retired. He passed away from cancer when I was really young, when I was about 9 years old, but I always have fond memories of him, and it's been nice working here because I've met a lot of guys who knew him and always have a really nice thing to say about him. Some guys have worked with him, and it made me feel good because I didn't get to know him very well. I have great memories of what I do know of him, but it's been really a pleasure meeting a bunch of guys here who say, oh, your grandfather, he was always a really great guy to me. He treated me fairly, and so that definitely got me. My grandfather and my family, we have a long line of police here. My father's cousins are Boston P.D. I have another cousin who's Boston P.D. My brother-in-law was with Watertown for a while, and I have a cousin who's with immigration. So there's a few of us in the family that do law enforcement, try to make it a family thing.
This month's Ask the Chief segment is a little expanded. In 2008, Patrolman Kevin Grasso, a 20-year veteran of the police force, was appointed to the position of Administrative Assistant to the Chief of Police. One of his important duties is to serve as the department's liaison to the press. As a public information officer, we will use Officer Grasso in this show from time to time, starting with this next segment. One of the broad-based initiatives in which Chief Brooks is involved is the Innocence Project. As a part of his responsibilities, which in March included delivering training to New York City's Police Department command staff at their academy, he found there was a void of material to assist him in showing how to conduct lineups which would withstand judicial review. With the help of NPA TV, we now possess the first such video, because we produced it. Here to fill you in on the Innocence Project and what are known as blind sequential lineups are Officer Kevin Grasso and Chief Bill Brooks.
Thank you, Lieutenant Murphy. We're here with Chief Brooks, and we're just talking about the Innocence Project. Chief, we understand that you do work with the Innocence Project. What does the Innocence Project do?
Well, the Innocence Project is a litigation and public policy organization located in New York City. And it was founded back a number of years ago by Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, who are attorneys. And essentially, there are two parts of the Innocence Project mission. The one that I guess that most people know it for is that the Innocence Project takes applications from people who are serving time in prison who claim that they are in prison for crimes they did not commit. And the Innocence Project looks to see if there is DNA evidence that would definitively demonstrate whether those inmates are guilty or innocent. The other lesser-known part of their mission is in the public policy side. So what they do is they take a look at, well, how did these prisoners get convicted in the first place? You know, how did this happen? And there's a number of reasons why people get wrongly convicted. Sometimes people confess to crimes that they didn't commit. People have a hard time getting their arms around that, but that's true. A certain percentage of those people who are in prison actually confessed. And the allegation in some cases is that the interviews and interrogations were very long and were stressful. And then another area is that in some cases, eyewitnesses mistakenly identified them. A victim of a crime or an eyewitness said, that's the guy who robbed me, or that's the person who sexually assaulted me. And of course, then the DNA in the end shows that, that it could not have been them, that it must have been someone else. As a matter of fact, 75% of people who were exonerated by DNA were convicted, at least in part, because they were identified by an eyewitness who was wrong.
Interesting. What is your role with the Innocence Project?
Well, it's kind of developed in that the Innocence Project has asked me to go around the country with some other speakers from their organization and talk to groups. Sometimes the groups are, for instance, I went to Michigan and talked to a task force put together by their state bar. The audience was judges, attorneys, prosecutors, law enforcement. And it was to talk to them about the problems around eyewitness identification. In other places, Idaho, Maryland, Philadelphia, for instance, the groups have been made up entirely of law enforcement. And my job is to go in and talk specifically about eyewitness identification. And that's my specialty, if you will. Typically, I appear with a forensic psychologist, a psychology professor from a university around the United States. The one I've done the most work with is Dr. Jennifer Dysart from John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City. And then somebody from the Innocence Project, their state policy reform director, Rebecca Brown, typically is the one who appears with us, and then me. And we put on a presentation typically around the causes of wrongful conviction, and my area is eyewitness identification.
What makes eyewitness identification so difficult?
Well, for about 100 years, psychologists and scientists have seen that there were problems with eyewitness identification, that eyewitnesses who think that they're identifying the perpetrator of a crime are sometimes wrong. And although the research has been around for about 100 years or so, most of it has taken place in the last 30 years. And basically, we look at the factors that affect an identification in two groups. So on one side, we look at estimated variables, things really beyond the control of the police. And then the other side is a group of factors called system variables. And system variables are under the control of the police and oftentimes occur during the investigative phase. And there are some prime examples. So one is when you're instructing a witness who is about to view a photo array or is about to view a lineup or something in the field called a show-up. How do you instruct that witness, and what do you tell the witness? The most important instruction is to tell the witness, you know, the person who committed the crime may or may not be here.
You will be viewing them one at a time. Please look at all of them. I am required to show you the entire series. They are in random order. Please make a decision about each person before moving on to the next one. The person who committed the crime may or may not be one of the people you are about to view.
Another factor is the way in which you demonstrate a photo array. Do you show all of the photos by laying them out? And that's how the police have done it for about the last 30 years. Or the new procedure is a sequential showing, which means that the witness can only see one photograph at a time. And the purpose behind that is to prevent them from running comparisons among the photographs. When you see the photographs all laid out on the desk in front of you, and I've seen this when I was a detective, is that witnesses would take a photograph and slide it away, and slide another one away. And what scientists have learned is that they have probably not recognized the photograph of the offender. What they're doing is eliminating the photographs that look least like the offender. And what's actually happening in the mind is something called relative judgment. They're trying to find the one that looks closest. Now that one who looks closest, if the offender is in the array, they'll probably be right. But if the offender is not in the array, if the police have identified somebody who's a suspect, but he's not actually the offender, they might pick him because he looks the most like the offender. So the way the police can avoid relative judgment is to only display photographs one at a time, and to more or less force the witness to say that's him or it's not, then put the photo aside and then hold up the second one. That's him or it's not, and put that up to one side. That's relative judgment. One factor that's controversial is an estimated variable called blind administration. And what that means is that the police officer showing the photo array or conducting the live lineup does not know which one of the people is the suspect. And this is to remove any possibility that the detective could pass an inadvertent or an unintentional cue. Even when showing the photograph of the suspect, raising an eyebrow or tilting the head, something that a person might do unintentionally, that it removes any possibility that could happen.
The officer administrating this procedure does not know whether any of the people were involved in the crime. The individuals you view may not appear exactly as they did on the date of the incident because features such as head and facial hair are subject to change.
Norwood Police Department has been using blind administration, sequential arrays, and the showing of photo arrays following formal instructions since 2005. We are really ahead of most other parts of the country. In fact, Massachusetts is, where these reforms have really been in place for about the last 8 years. The other thing, finally, when you've shown an array or a lineup, and the witness says, it's number 3, it's important that the officer asks right away, well, without using numbers, how certain are you?
It's number 3.
Without using a numerical scale, how certain are you?
Absolutely positive it's number 3.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
To make sure that you lock in the witness's perception of how confident they are in their selection. Because when you don't do that, that confidence or that certainty can fluctuate over time. So the witness who says, I think that's probably him, might later tell an assistant DA, I picked him right out. Or may later at trial say, I'll never forget that face, when that's not actually what they said when they saw the photos or saw the lineup the first time. So that's called a confidence statement or a statement of certainty. And taking it right away and documenting the exact words that are spoken by the eyewitness is a crucial part of this process.
I understand that MPA TV has worked with you in creating a video. Can you explain the video to us?
It was a wonderful project. I was invited by the Innocence Project to deliver an address at the NYPD Academy in Manhattan a couple of weeks ago. And the NYPD, as a result of case law in the state of New York, shows a higher rate of live lineups than most police departments around the country. So regardless of how they arrive at probable cause to believe a particular suspect has committed a crime, they confirm it with a live lineup, like you'd see on television. Most police departments use photos, but the NYPD does these live lineups. And I've described to you what a blind sequential photo array is like. It's logistically difficult to run a blind sequential lineup because the officers administering the lineup can't know who the suspect is. Usually a lineup is done with 2 rooms, an observation room where the witness stands, and then a participant room where the lineup takes place. The officer standing in the participant room and the officer in the observation room cannot know which one is the suspect. And this is all designed to completely eliminate the possibility of inadvertent, unintentional cues. The other thing, of course, with a sequential lineup is that the people really don't line up anymore. So if you've seen on television where the fillers who are the people who are not the suspect, and then the suspect all hold a numbered card, and they stand there and the witness looks back and forth. To avoid relative judgment, the police try to avoid that in a live lineup. So how is it done? Well, once you've got a blind administrator in each of the rooms, you close the door of the observation room so that the witness is kind of locked inside the room with the officer. And then the lineup actually takes place outside the room. You take it's usually 6 people, a suspect and 5 fillers, and you line them up in the corridor. And then the officer in the participant room calls them in one at a time. They stand in front of the glass, turn to the left, turn to the right. They're holding a card while they do that. And then number 1 leaves the room and number 2 comes in. Well, you can explain that, but it can be difficult to visualize. So I talked to the Innocence Project in New York City and said, you know, this really calls for a training video. I think we can do a training video here and demonstrate all of the various steps that the police would use to run a blind sequential lineup, a live lineup that would completely conform with the eyewitness identification reforms that are moving throughout the country. They were enthused about the idea, so we took it upon ourselves here at the Norwood Police Department, working with NPA Television, specifically the people who produced this show, Norwood P.D. Blue. And we got together a group of employees of the police department. We had 2 patrol officers play the parts of the blind administrator, one of our own detectives, Detective John Glover, to play the part of the detective. Cindy Cady, the secretary and detectives, played the role of the eyewitness. And then we had 6 hockey players who volunteered, thanks to the work of our producer Mike Maloof, who got them all together to play the role of the 5 fillers and 1 to play the role of the suspect. The kids seemed to enjoy it. The members of the department, the 2 officers, Nick Garino and Bob Hawkins, and the others that I've mentioned, seemed to enjoy doing it. We did it in an afternoon, and we did it with a couple of cameramen from NPA Television, and we produced this 14-minute video on blind sequential lineups. It is the only training video that I know of in law enforcement that shows how to implement these reforms with live lineups. It was a 14-minute video. I brought it to New York City. I played it before an audience which was essentially command-level officers and detectives of the NYPD Major Case Squad, and it got a great review, not only from the police officers but from the Innocence Project. And I think that this is a video that we'll show around the country now. I've spoken, I think, in 8 or 10 different states doing these similar projects. And this is a video that I will use that literally thousands of police officers around the country will view. So certainly our thanks and our hats off to NPA Television. Due to our ongoing relationship with them through the production of this show, we were able to pull this together in a very short period of time. And the results was a great video.
I did see the video, and it was put together really well. Good job.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Brian Murphy. In our first 2 episodes of Norwood P.D. Blue, our history segment featured the difficult ordeals of a patrolman being shot in one and a sergeant being stabbed in another. We'll intentionally lighten up the subject this episode. No one gets hurt, a crime is solved, someone goes to jail, and the town of Norwood has perhaps its first experience with reality television. Were you around in the winter of 1962 into the spring of 1963? Your memories of Sunday night television might include NBC's lineup, which included Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. Car 54, Where Are You? My personal favorite. Both seasons are now available finally on DVD. And Bonanza was also in their lineup. In CBS, you would watch Lassie, Dennis the Menace, The Ed Sullivan Show. Much later at night, long after I'd been sent off to bed, Candid Camera and What's My Line were the popular choices, while NBC showed a program called the DuPont Show of the Week. The DuPont Show varied from week to week, presenting dramas, documentaries, some comedy and music. I have to believe on April 21st, 1963, 50 years ago this month, that all TV sets in Norwood, still on at 10 p.m., were tuned to the DuPont Show of the Week. for the town of Norwood and its police department in particular were to be featured prominently in the show they titled Prisoner at Large. The episode, which was narrated by Walter Matthau, told the story of Massachusetts parole officer Joseph McCormick. He was from West Roxbury, but he was well known in Norwood, as he handled 3 parolees trying to stay on the straight and narrow. For much of the winter, the NBC television crew was in and around Norwood, filming McCormick and his 3 parolees. One of the parolees lived in Norwood, and 2, including John Hackett, worked in Norwood. In the segments filmed in Norwood, McCormick, Lieutenant James Murphy, had scripted parts. Sergeant Henry Breen, Patrolman John Wall, Bill Travers, Jim Curran, and Joe Coyne would all appear in scene producers anticipated would be used. Then on the night of Saturday, January 5th, everything changed for Hackett and for the show as it had been planned. A couple that lived on Westview Drive came home to find their home was in the process of being burglarized. The home was thoroughly ransacked. As the couple came in, the thief fled out the rear. He vaulted a 6-foot fence at the rear of the property and was seen running through the well-lit boatyard of Norwood Chris-Craft, then located on Route 1. The man was believed to resemble Hackett. The couple knew Hackett. In the course of the job for a local plumbing firm, Hackett had worked in their house. Officers John Wall and Joseph Coyne were sent on the B&E call to investigate. They found burnt matches in many of the rooms. The burglar did not come prepared with a flashlight and did not risk putting lights on. Perhaps the break wasn't well planned. Perhaps it was a spur-of-the-moment decision on the burglar's part. By Sunday night, everything had changed for Hackett. Lieutenant James Murphy and Officer John Wall located Hackett in Stoughton and arrested him for the break-in entry and the larceny. He was brought back to the Norwood Police Station, which at the time was housed in the bottom floor of the town hall. The Central Street entrance was the main entrance of the police department. The NBC crew was there. Hackett was booked, further questioned at the station. Parole Officer McCormick came to the station as well. The final scene of the show would be shot at a location not anticipated, the Dedham Jail. Ultimately, Hackett's parole would be revoked. He would be returned to prison for 6 months and still face the new burglary charge. By the time the April 21st, 1963 broadcast of the show, Lieutenant Murphy had been appointed Chief of Police upon the death of Chief Mark Folan. Joe McCormick would be promoted too. He was now a member of the parole board. When Hackett's parole was reviewed, McCormick recused himself. Hackett was held. Sergeant Henry Breen retired after serving 42 years for the Norwood Police Department. John Wall, Bill Travers were both promoted to sergeant. So far, we've failed in our efforts to locate a copy of the DuPont show, Prisoner at Large, in any format. The best we can offer, then, is a series of screenshots taken by a commercial photographer from Norwood, taken for the publication of the April 25th edition of the Norwood Times. Here, then, is reality television, true crime, in fact, from 50 years ago this month.